Every day, we can experience a full range of emotions, from joy to grief, peace, frustration, and everything in between.
But we're still expected to be an A player at work, be a good partner, to parent children, take care of our animals, and have food on the table, even in the throes of grief. So, how the hell are we supposed to do it all?
On the Human Sessions podcast, we'll guide you through strategies for being your authentic self in every part of your life, no matter which emotions are in the driver's seat that day. We'll talk about how human design, energy, and Reiki can all be useful tools for showing up and showing up well.
And if we lost you at the word energy, I promise you will walk away from every episode with tactical tips to feel more like yourself.
I'm Rachel Hatterberg-Walt, human energetics expert and Reiki master.
And I'm Val Marini, grief and trauma specialist and energy healer. This is a no bullshit zone.
This is an anti-perfectionism haven.
This is the Human Sessions podcast.
Okay, welcome everyone. Today we're going to be chatting about how human design can really be supportive when navigating the highs and lows of life. So human design gives you language and concepts around what it looks like when you might be out of alignment of your true self, your highest self, your best feeling self, and when you're maybe coming from a place of fear. Maybe life experience has influenced your energy in a way that you're showing up in ways that are not resourceful to you, maybe even harmful to other people. And that doesn't mean that you're lacking in any way. That doesn't mean that you're unworthy. That doesn't mean that you're not whole. That doesn't mean that you're a bad person. You're good inside, as Dr. Becky, one of the parenting gurus I love, says. You are good inside because you are. But sometimes it's really hard to show up as that good self because of the things that we talk about: grief, trauma, lived experience, triggers, really hard life circumstances, either in the present or the past. And so that is one of the most practical, useful, grounding, helpful ways to use the human design chart, is to give yourself clarity and self-compassion in the present time, but then use it as a map to navigate from the lower vibration, if you will, the lowest expression, through the gift expression, and maybe even to the highest gift expression, or the city expression is the terminology in the Gene Keys, which is a sister science to human design. That's a little more descriptive and a little more contemplative for some of these energy patterns. But Val, how do you see that as a manifesting generator play out in your life practically?
The goal of every day, or at least my goal every day, is to wake up and find my best and highest and show up as my most sparkling, most powerful, most energized. But certainly, and Rachel, you just touched on this pretty well. There is how we want to show up when we are resourced and when we are in that space. And I've experienced I've done a ton of work over the last few years, and I've really focused on a lot of these components. And the more that I've learned to understand my own type and how my layers of life experience kind of either influence or compound or detract from that, it's at top of mind. So I think the consciousness and the awareness of it is really helping me a ton. But right now we're in this time of, let's say energetically and from a macro level, it's a time of major transition and change. There's a ton of push pull, like a ton of push pull. And for those of us who have been in this work, we know that it is not, whether we're talking about just general life or recovering from deeper traumas and deeper grief, it's never going to be like a straight line out. And we've talked about this. It's like that spiral where you're hard marching up and blazing that trail for yourself. And then you're going to kind of slide back down every once in a while and retest. And I've been experiencing in my world a ton of that retesting lately. And I can feel the push pull internally where I have my manifesting generator hat on and I'm like, oh my God, I love all the things. And there are these waves where I get these boosts where I'm like, oh, I can start all these projects. I have all these great ideas. And they feel great and they do feel energizing and I do feel resourced in the moment. And then 48 hours later, life has happened and there's a lot of grief in the system and there's a lot of like macro elements that I cannot control through my grounding. There's no way that I'm going to be able to control them in terms of I mean I could avoid and I could ignore and I could delay, but I am definitely feeling that shadow self coming up. And I've been stressed through the holidays and closing out travel for work, and we're in retrograde, things like that, where it is top of mind. And so I'm feeling, and you will help us understand this because you have my chart and the keys to everything. Um,
I don't know to everything, but
everything. But for me, it's like I'm doing a lot of like really interesting observation of my own behaviors and observation of my own reactions and responses. And sometimes I'm able to be like, oh, okay, like this is the shift. Here's the higher self choice that I have in this moment because I have the energy and I am resourced. And I think when I am able to observe it and I'm not like deep, deep in it, that's affordable. But there's, that like emotional wave that I'm also riding. And some of it is taking an invitation. I feel like this season has really given us a lot of us the invitation to reassess our perspective and approach. And that doesn't mean our core beliefs are changing and it doesn't mean we're losing progress. But when I started my journey and in my type, it was like an all in I was able to go all in and it was like hyper focused on what I was doing. And now we're in this place where I am not isolated in that anymore. I've opened up some of those boundaries and I'm bringing in other perspectives. And I think that those perspectives, especially those in personality types that I know are like work well with me, but are counter to me or see things differently than me, I'm really leveraging that a lot in this moment to be like, okay, going into 2025, even though I don't believe in like 24-hour transformation, the intent and like starting to build the intent and build the focus and start to like nudge in my routines. What do I need? Focusing on like, how do I land in that place where I'm observing more and reacting less?
that nails the core of showing up as our not best self and then our highest self is the reaction versus the intention. And we've talked about this in other episodes too. The human design experiment gives you more guardrails on that too. If you haven't looked at your patterns as much as maybe you have or I have, it's a really nice place to start. So, as a manifesting generator with your aura type, your emotional signatures can give you some clarity on, whoa, I am so angry. I've gotten so angry in this one circumstance. I'm feeling so frustrated in this relationship. What is going on? Because as manifesting generator, you are the combination of a manifestor aura type and a generator aura type. And those are the emotional signatures telling you, hey, something's not right. You're either under the influence of fear, or you're really needing some basic needs to be met, or somebody really jumped over your boundary there, or is pushing you to a place that is not in alignment with your values. Those are the emotions that you want to pay attention to help when you are in that low place, when you are showing up reactive. And reactivity looks so different to people, like depending on what their nature is too. Like the Gene Keys gives a lot of description around this, but when you're in that lower shadowy self, you can either be reactive in a way that you're like biting someone's head off, or repressed in a way of like people are just running all over you and you can't find any self confidence to set a boundary or tell someone to stop. And depending on what your tendencies are, it's still not in your highest self. It's still that shadowy, unresourced way that you react to a circumstance, or you react to someone's decision or something they said to you, or something like that. So it doesn't mean, like, when we're in reactivity, it doesn't, if that's not resonating with you, if that doesn't make sense to you when I'm talking about being in a lower state of energy, it could be that you are showing up more as a repressed side of the shadowy energy. I show up, I mean, and a lot of us show up depending on what the trigger is, depending on what the circumstance is. You might show up in the reactive way, and then you might show up as the repressed way of the shadow energy, even in your own like energy. You're not always showing up as the reactive side or the repressed side, but it's a combination of both. And so to know that if you're not finding your voice, and you usually do in a circumstance that feels uncomfortable to you, you're probably in the lowest expression. And then how can you get your footing back? That's where some of the, like for a manifesting generator, if you're in anger, if you're in frustration, and you start noticing these patterns and you're showing up by reacting to people or letting people run all over you in that same container, a helpful way is to say, okay, at using your authority, which is your decision maker, of either waiting out your emotional wave or checking in with your gut, asking yourself yes, no questions, or sounding it out if you're one of the sounding board authorities, um, or listening to your spleen, those subtle impulses if you're a splenic authority. Is it this? Is it that? Listening to your own guidance system, contemplating it, and even just reflecting on it can really get you out of that stuck, shadowy kind of pattern reactivity behavior. And a lot of times, as we've talked about, it's a trauma trigger. It's like your
Yeah.
nervous system kind of is not regulated and you can't contemplate. That is not the time to do the self reflection in the moment, right? Like when your nervous system is triggered and reactive or totally shut down in a, um, repressive presentation, that is not the time where you're going to have access to that left hemisphere of your brain to contemplate and find patterns. You kind of have to find your grounding, find your safety first, remove yourself from the situation, do all the things that we've talked about, get a drink of water, splash water on your face, squeeze your fingers, take some deep breaths, go look at nature, all of those grounding tools to regulate your system a little bit until that left hemisphere can start coming online. And then you can look back and say, oh, well, it makes sense that I bit her head off because I was, sleep deprived. I hadn't had, water that day. I've been running myself and burning myself out. I know that this, let's say it's in a, container of a committee or something at church or at work or at school. I know that this is out of alignment and I haven't had the confidence to kind of give my powerful no yet. Um, that is way more helpful to look back and see after you notice the patterns coming up. Expecting yourself to do that in the present moment is unreasonable.
I think that's a really good point. Also, because there's a lot of like memes, or I would say just like general kind of like pros or advice where it's like, don't go to bed angry, or like resolve every conflict as soon as it comes up. And that doesn't work for me.
No.
Sometimes it does. Like in the moment, saying something, absolutely, if you feel like you have that available to you. And I'm not for silent treatment. That's also
Mm-mm.
like those are two polar ends of the spectrum. And where I've landed in my relationships, especially if it's something that like activates like a core wound or is activating something deeper than just you moved my cheese, like there's a little bit more happening there. Or like in my relationship, I will frequently be like, hey, I'm not ready to talk about this thing yet. Can we set up this time? Can we talk about that tomorrow? But like in a way where it's like communicating, I'm not going to hold my anger. I just need to process this. Like
It's
I need,
not the right time to dig through this right now, but we will be digging through this because
yeah,
it's worthy of our attention and our repair and all of
yeah,
that. Well, I think, don't go to bed angry is one of those things we throw out to kind of put a band-aid on things, to bypass things. And those little sound bites like that of little advice, sometimes, yes, can be really helpful, but a lot of times it is the situation is too nuanced. We can't live by rules like that 100% of the time. Like, never go to bed angry. Are you kidding me?
no, and like there's certain dynamics, and especially because I know my relationship or relationships, and like depending on the makeup of whatever's at play, it comes down to what I don't wanna do, I'm very clear on. I don't want to, stonewall. I don't want
Mhm.
to do silent treatment. I've been in relationships with people that have narcissistic or borderline personality where it's like if they don't get their way or you don't respond in their way, they're going to use that as a punishment, and that is an unhealthy cycle. But there are
Well, and
times
that
that
is an example of them showing up as their lowest vibration,
correct.
lowest self, shadow self. Yeah.
And in coming from my higher self, even when I'm not the most resourced or not in the best place, or I'm activated and I can feel all the bells and whistles going on in my body, what I found that works for me is obviously to leverage everything you just talked about. Can I get in nature? Can I take a walk? Have I had water? Do I need a snack? Like just some of those basic needs, but also getting into that. How can I acknowledge this person from my highest self when I'm not in my highest self and just say, okay, these are the things that I definitely need to do to repair this situation, but also honor my boundaries, which is, hey, I really do want to talk about this. I don't want to push you out. However, I just need a little bit more time to process my response. Does that work for you? Is that affordable to you? And like create that communication. So then it also allows the other person to maybe move away from their shadow self because they're certainly also activated if there's conflict and they're going to show up in their ways. And, we talked about before, of course, I'm more anxious attachment. I get linked to more avoidant attachment. So, like, the cycle could perpetuate so easily, like, so
Well, that's why
quickly
human design
escalating.
is so helpful, right?
Yeah.
Because if you have both people in the relationship, no matter what kind of relationship it is, if you know the other person's energetic signature and
Mhm.
makeup and you know your own, you can depersonalize it from it's me against you. And it's easier to go from us against our shadow selves or our shadow patterns or our unhelpful patterns. Us against the problem is a lot more compassionate and productive than me against you. Because then we go into that, what's that triangle called? Like victim, savior, perpetrator,
Oh,
or whatever that
oh,
triangle is called.
enabler.
We end up, yeah, we end up defaulting to those positions to get a need met of significance or power, something like that. Versus if you know that person's energetic signature, you know yours because of human design and other tools, you can say, oh, well, we need to take a beat.
Yep.
We need to talk about this pattern. We need to talk about what happened here. But right now is not the time because my brain is not thinking, my emotions are writing. So when is a good time for us to talk? Does that sound good to you? And then you can kind of use some nonviolent communication tactics too.
Yeah.
Um, but it's really helpful to breed some space in that to see that okay, I'm just not in my highest self right now. I'm in my shadowy self. I need to take a beat. I need to get grounded so I can access some of the tools to be able to show up in a way that can move the needle forward and can really inspire more connection and relationship versus keeping the separation. And I think those strategies that you were talking, those unhelpful strategies like stonewalling and silent treatment and all of that is really just perpetuating more separation where a tool like human design can bring more connection even in friction, even in strife, even in fights, which is a total paradigm shift in the way that you want to look in relationship. But relationship research shows, like I think we've mentioned before too, if there's no conflict in your relationships, that's really a red flag. It's not a good thing. But it's how we navigate times where our inner children are fighting each other, our shadow expressions are fighting each other. It's not really us, it's not really our highest self, it's not really how we really want to show up. But how can we use those times as a an avenue, a channel for more love, more connection, more understanding, more empathy? I'm sure all of us can find some time where we've had a fight, quote unquote, but really it was so great to clear the air and gain some more understanding and hear the person's perspective and get your perspective out. And then you felt closer to the person at the other end of it. I always talk about emotional math, like, hate or hurt plus compassion equals compassion. Like you
Yeah.
take away, if you can both show up with some sort of compassion and depersonalize some of the things a little bit, not to excuse yourself from your bad behavior, but to
No.
depersonalize it a little bit so you can have compassion. And then that is what both of you can take away from the situation instead of more hurt, pain, separation.
No, totally. And it's interesting when you were talking about that, my mind went to back in my fitness gym owner days. when we're talking about like strength and flexibility, the way that you
Mhm.
achieve that is by like breaking down the muscle and then letting it build
Mhm.
itself back up. And so when you're talking about that like tension and release, that is really important to experience in relationships because that is how you repair, but it is also how you build strength. So to your
What
point,
a great imagery analogy of that. I love that so much. I've never heard anybody speak to it that way, but that is so accurate. That resonates so much. And it's like
yeah.
any growth needs the contraction. It's like, the season of winter, and we're going to be talking about the
Oh yeah.
energetics of the seasons moving forward too. But the season of winter is a contracting time. It's where, we've dropped the leaves, we get really internal, we prepare the way for the spring to come. Like that contraction is such an important part of the expansion. And that happens within us, in our bodies, that happens in our communities, in our relationships, in our creative projects, in our work, and we don't acknowledge that. Again, it kind of goes back to the grief, the lack of acknowledgement of the grief of letting go. But it's a critical component to creation and to love and to connection is the breaking down to rebuild. It's the destruction. I have that as one of my core energetics in my human design is the gate 49 of revolution. But at the core, it's destruction. At the
Yeah.
shadow, it's destruction. And then in
It's
the
also like,
gift, it's revolution. And then the highest self is rebirth. It's like, how do you create from the destruction and contraction? It's a necessary component.
well, it's so interesting because I mean, we're touching on I've been spending a lot of space in the last week or so in I would say like kind of like a pressure cooker. So I was very aware of like the astrology and energies happening. I'm also very aware that these past 2 weeks, or I would say this last month, are like compressed timelines from a work and stress and just doing all the things, everything's coming at perspective. And I've just noticed a ton of opportunity to kind of bypass or get lost in the middle where we go back to that when we're talking about our higher selves, there's a lot of bypassing if we don't understand the work that's underneath the hood of the car, right? So to your point, like revolution or the life that we want or whatever we would say is like the thing that we are trying to manifest, this idea we get where it's like, well, if I do all of these things, it's going to align and it's going to be beautiful. And I'm going to know because beauty is just going to come at me from every direction. It's like, no, you're going to know because shit is going to come at you from every direction. And you're going to find a new definition of beauty, a new definition of strength. But the path will not be easy. At least it will not, the easy path does not lead you to the place that you truly want to be. The easy path leads you to the place where you're going to get tested through all your shadows in a more continuous state. And so it's
Yeah.
interesting because I've had like this coming up. And when you said revolution, and I was like, yeah, 100% I see that. I mean, obviously your chart tells us that, but it's also in the path that you choose where you're not choosing the next easy step. But we have to consciously get to that place of being like, okay, I'm going to choose this thing because this feels aligned to me, even though I know I'm being tested. I know there's a lesson. I know it's going to be hard. And that's the only way forward.
Well, an alignment does not equal easy, is
Mhm.
what I think you're saying.
Yeah.
Alignment does not equal easy, but it makes it worth it,
Yeah.
right? It brings the sense of value and meaning that you're looking for in the life experience if you choose to accept your mission in that way.
Well, it's like
um,
your shadow self, you have to make friends with it. It's the same way we have to make friends with grief or we have to make friends with,
Well, the higher self is no better than the lower
oh,
self. The higher self is no more significant, better. It's not in a hierarchy that we want to put it in. Like white patriarchy tells us, everything's a hierarchy. You're better than me, I'm better than you. How can I power grab? That is not reality, right? I mean, it's a reality we've created, but it's not, I think, core to our innate energetic hearts,
yeah.
right? And this year has been a true testimony in navigating your way through a life experience that doesn't feel good or doesn't look good on the surface, coping, making friends with the shadows, taking the lessons along the way, and then being creative and being resourceful to make it work for you and your highest best. And highest and best. And a lot of that is accessing your own trust in self, trust in each other, and trust that there's something else going on here that you can lean on that is supporting you. I think that, we can't make things black and white,
Mhm.
but love and trust versus fear and doubt and constriction and lack is a
Yep.
real close kind of tapping in point towards, oh, I was just really scared. So, of course, I showed up as my shadowy self. And that looks like, as a generator, so I'm a pure generator in human design, that looks like frustration and then amplified frequencies of that frustration, which looks like anger, which looks like reactivity. If
Yeah.
I'm scared, like, my husband's job got eliminated a year ago, and at first, I mean, I also knew his astrology. I knew the energies coming up this year, so I wasn't shocked, but it didn't prevent me from feeling fear. I mean, a loss of a job in a family is going to bring a lot of fear because it's touching in on your foundational
Yeah.
safety, security, finances. So I moved through that. We moved through that together. We are also, privileged. We have safety nets socially, financially. His company took care of him very well, which enabled us to meet other financial goals. He got a new job. I had to get a new job, and then we bought this house. Like, so
Yeah.
it kind of was the tower moment in tarot. Like, it was kind of the breaking down, the destruction of the old to pave the way for the new. But that doesn't look pretty. I mean, that was not
No.
a gorgeous path. It was not a path that my limited perspective view would have chosen. But it got us where we are today, which is more alignment. I mean, we're
Yeah.
in a place of more alignment and more connection because we weathered that storm and we used tools and resources that we had access to and the knowledge of our energetic signatures and our tendencies to support us along the way.
Yeah, your resilience is
Yeah.
far greater now.
Well, and then it's building that trust muscle for the next, shit that hits the fan. You're like, I got this. I
Yep.
got this because I know what my tendencies are. I know where my strengths lie. I know where I need more resourcing in times of trouble. And then you feel, not that we have control. That's an illusion, but you feel like you have control, which
Yeah.
brings you a little more trust, feelings of safety to keep you in that open-hearted, heart coherent kind of space.
It's interesting because, I mean, to your point, we want that safety. We want it to be predictable. We want the answers. And I do think that folks, or some of us, when we're newer to natal charts or human design or any sort of concept where there's some belief in a predisposed path, I would say, in a loose way. There's a path. We're still making choices. We're still, evolving on our own in that time. But I knew from doing my natal chart, I think I did my natal chart in 2021, in like earnest, and knew that in 2024 there was major shifts in career for me. There were major shifts in like a couple areas, and that was on my mind all the time. But it wasn't until I got into like a more challenging space did I realize that like the only path was to surrender. Sometimes we can look forward and be like, oh, this thing is going to come, or we can try to predict scarcity or predict struggle or predict whatever to avoid it. The only way out was through. And for me, it was a really interesting experience of acknowledging that, finding that full surrender, following the path of the unknown, still with trust, which I think was new for me. And from that, landed in a much, much better place and a much more aligned place. But it was, to your point, like a brutal smackdown of like just letting things burn, no matter how much I either wanted to save it or wanted to feel the security of the known life before.
Well, and I think the more comfortable we get with feelings of loss, feelings of grief, the more we're going to be able to accept those stages in our lives with greater resilience and clarity and um, kind of joy. Not that you would look forward to something like that, but at least think. this isn't the end of the world. I've been over a bridge like this before. I've reached a chasm, and maybe it's not as big as this chasm feels, but I know I can navigate my way and I can trust my way through it. Um,
Yeah.
so, Abraham Hicks talks about that as the step one to manifestation is the friction point, is the destruction, is the liminal space, is the disruption in your life. It's the friction, and we don't stay there. We can't stay there, or we won't be able to move through to create what we're intending to create. But it is step one. It's kind of
Yeah.
part of the process. And it's not that we're doing anything wrong and we're not bad. And it doesn't mean we're misaligned. It just
Nope.
means that we're humans on earth having a creative experience, and part of the creative experience is the destruction. So let's go over for those reflectors
Yep.
and projectors and manifestors that are listening, some of those energetic signatures and strategies so they can know what to look for. If they're showing up reactive, why that might be, giving some concepts around that. So, a manifestor or a type is an initiator, they're creative. And when they see patterns of anger, that is a signal to say, whoa, I'm probably not showing up in my highest self here because I'm just covered in anger. And when we're covered in anger and we can't get out of that pattern, we're really constricted and it's hard to see a path forward. But when you know that about yourself and you know that that could be a tendency of your energy type, it's a surrendering device.
So I'm a manifesting generator, and we've talked a little bit about that. You are a generator. We've talked a little bit about that, but could probably go a little bit deeper. So why don't we pick another type and talk a little bit about how they may be experiencing this moment?
Manifestors that might be experiencing burnout or life experiences that are giving them trouble, mental or emotional health issues for any reason, it might look like anger. So every aura type has emotional signatures. For a manifestor, that's anger. So if you're having patterns of anger, if you're thinking about something and it just makes you angry, that is an indication that your conditioned self or your shadowy tendencies are probably showing up. And that's really just an invitation to get curious about what's not working for you. It doesn't mean you're wrong. It doesn't mean you're bad. It doesn't even mean you're misaligned, really. It just means that it's an invitation to get curious about, where might you be able to set a boundary or stand up for yourself or redirect decision making or ask yourself if what you're spending your time, love, money, energy on is in integrity with your values. So it's really an invitation. It doesn't mean you're wrong. It doesn't mean you're bad. It doesn't mean that you're not worthy of good things, of peace. It's really an invitation to get curious about where you do have power to make some changes to allow your energy to flow with less restriction and constriction. So pay
Awesome.
attention to your anger versus your peace, and that can give you a way through. I mean, even just the awareness of knowing that can help decrease some of the storytelling that we do around why we're so angry and give you a resourceful path forward. Another indication for a manifestor is their strategy is to inform others of what they're up to, mainly about their creative pursuits and desires and what they're manifesting, what they're creating, what they're excited about. So if you're a manifestor and you're having a hard time accessing your creative flow or getting excited about things and then telling people about it, it's probably that you're in either a life experience, maybe you've experienced loss, maybe you are in burnout, maybe you haven't prioritized your rest, you're not getting your basic needs met. If you're trying to hold down three jobs as a manifestor, you're going to get burned out really quick, especially if you don't have independence to create and be starting cool projects and be leading. That is going to put you in a place where you are in fear, you are in constriction, you are in anger, and it's going to be hard to feel the empowerment to inform other people of what you're doing. So you're going to feel probably a lot of resistance, which is going to perpetuate the cycle. But again, it's an invitation to see where your personal power actually is and make subtle movements here and there to wiggle your way out. This doesn't mean that you have to blow up your life and like choose a totally different path. It's really subtle changes, towards the positive trajectory that you're really looking for. I think that's what really scares people about times of
Yeah.
disruption and friction, and in times of loss and grief and disruption is, um, they it feels like your life is blown up or you have to blow up your life to make changes. If you are generally feeling just down and out, and it's an invitation to find your personal power, to wiggle worm your way towards a greater expression of yourself, you don't have to blow your life up. So that's what it looks like for a manifester. For a generator like myself, that's frustration. I have to pay attention to my frustration, and I have to pay attention to my strategy of responding. When we're in fear, lack, trigger, distrust, we can find it really easy to push a timeline, to force our limited view will on whatever circumstance it is, to control, to micromanage. And that is going to cause a lot of frustration, and it's putting a lot of rocks in the river of your energy. It's going to provide you with a lot more friction, because generators are meant to respond to the world, not force things to happen, which can happen when you're in your lowest self. So, another way out as a generator. And then, of course, both of those things for you, like you, Val, the manifesting
Yeah.
generators. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because it's both of those things plus conditioning, right? And we've talked a lot about generationally in parts of my family, there was certainly a lot more fear and a lot more scarcity, whether it was like true or manufactured, that led to, I would say, controlling behaviors, controlling language, controlling reactions. And so a lot of what I spend time on, especially where we were talking earlier about how I want to respond in conflict or how I want to respond, and it's usually not like a black and white conflict or like it's not about like loading the dishwasher, right? It's always about something else where I will be more anxious paired with someone who is more avoidant 99% of the time. You can rinse and repeat that across so many relationships in my life and friendships. But what I've learned, because it is hard to lose the conditioning and it is hard to work through the reactive response cycles that we're taught, and just that the general default, even when we're not necessarily in our shadow, like in a dorsal state, I will have to be like, how do I want to respond to this? Because the language matters and the outcome that I'm looking for matters. Let's say we're trying to convince somebody of something. It's like, well, why am I trying to convince them of that? Is it because that's going to give me security, but it's not really security? It's just not being right is the problematic path. Or if we're talking about relationships, it's interesting because when I think about my family that has more of a controlling mindset, it tends to be the women. It tends to be, and it's not based off of like overt narcissism. It's more of like fear, scarcity, lack, all of that. And in relationship, trying to manipulate in a certain direction. But if my grounding is like, I don't want a relationship to have a relationship because that's not my thing, whether it's a friendship or a more romantic relationship, what are the conditions that we're creating and what am I trying to force? I don't want to be in a relationship or friendship with anybody who is not equally as invested, where it's also not aligned for them. And a lot of times I think we use language to respond in a way that's like more manipulative than it is freeing.
Mhm.
And
Well, it's another expression of the control from the fear,
exactly.
from the lack.
Just like,
Um,
how am I responding and what outcome am I trying to drive? That's like where I constantly come back to, which is like, oh, wow, that also gives me a release. Not only am I not forcing this person on the other side of whatever this conflict or decision is down a path that isn't right for them. If it's not right for them, it's not right for me. So maybe I need to take pause in this moment and say, hey, here's where I am. I'm going to lay out the facts. You are not beholden to my ideas or approach or thoughts or wants. What I am asking for is your truth back so that I can make a rational decision on how to move forward. And I feel like that was the newer approach for me. And there's
Mhm.
an aspect of also being surrounded by people who receive that better because I'm choosing who's in my environment more consciously. And so it's creating better cycles and it's creating space that allows for that. But it's been a really interesting thing to actually take out certain phrases or approaches from my mindset and vernacular and how I approach people to be more thoughtful and like, oh, hey, like maybe getting this person on board in my direction is not right for either of us.
Oh, but that gosh, Val, but that's hard as fuck.
It's so hard. You know what else is hard?
That is
Being
so
in the wrong moment,
hard
the wrong relationship.
because yeah, I mean, we get such significance and power from being right that takes humility, trust. That is so hard. That is paradigm shifting, and I think overall what we're speaking to is bringing more consciousness into our relationships, having conscious relationships with everyone and having an approach to life in that way, having more conscious living where you are being thoughtful and intentional about how you show up in relationship. And again, it depersonalizes it from you being wrong and the two of you in the relationship or you in relationship to the world is I am being conditioned and I have unconscious patterns and unconscious influences on how I show up. And I have life experiences that put me in positions where I'm going to be tested. How do I navigate that with intention and consciousness, eyes wide open, ears wide open, heart wide open, mind wide open to move towards the shared goal of what's everyone's highest and best versus what I think is right?
It's like a credit to all of the work, right? Because I can tell
Yeah.
my type and I'm pretty good with it at this point. But then I'm so in tune with the layers of trauma and the different wounding that we have where it's like I know if I'm in a relationship with somebody who has severe trauma, they have abandonment wounds and they're avoidant. And I'm going to come from a more anxious abandonment wound, want to attack the issue in the moment, that's not setting anybody up for success, right? Because my trigger is gonna be, "Oh, I'm gonna wanna be like, fine, then I'll take my toys and I'm gonna go home," because that's safe
Right.
for me. That's my, like, eject. And for
But
that
someone has to be the adult in the room, right? Like someone has to step out of their inner child self, their conditioned self, their traumatized self, and say, whoa, 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 whoa. We've got to stop this cycle
yeah,
and move in a different direction. And that's what human design does. That's what all these other somatic tools do and the healing work does is it allows you that step out and new perspective, higher perspective to say, whoa, whoa, whoa. We're just playing inner child playground bullshit right now. Let's both get out of the cycle and look at it from a third point of view of us against the problem and say, okay, when this happens, you show up like this.
mhm,
When you do this, I show up like this. How can we rebalance the dynamics so we both feel secure? We both are getting our needs met. We're both feeling heard, seen. We both belong to each other. And that is everything. I mean, that's how you show up in relation, obviously, in like romantic
yeah,
partners, but friendships, business relationships, how you show up to even someone that like misjudges you in social media comments or somebody that like cuts you off in traffic. To be able to say, whoa, 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 there has to be something else going on here. What's more to the story? Using your critical thinking skills to get out of the reactivity pattern is so helpful and healing and peaceful
yeah,
and conscious, but it's hard as shit. And it's hard to opt into that unless you have to, which is why a lot of what we talk about is the entry into this type of work and seeing life in this way is usually not through peace or satisfaction or success or surprise, those higher vibe emotional signatures of the aura type. It's really through the anger, frustration, bitterness, disappointment, those types of things, disruption life
yeah,
that call us forward. But it is worth it. Because once you do see how this kind of perspective helps you in relationships and helps you with aligning to your values in every part of your life, whether it's your finances, whether it's your time and your schedule or your energetic commitments. Um, it's so worth the work once you get into it. But until you show yourself and kind of see to believe that that is possible for you, that you can show up as the person you want to show up as, and then
Yeah.
receive more love and connection and belonging on the other side of it, you can't stop. You can't unknow what you know at that point.
It's also important, and this, as you were saying that came up, it's also important when you start this work to be very, very aware. And you mentioned this, and this is the whole rationale for doing this in relationships and groups, but to know what the other person, how things are going to land for them based off of their type and then also their conditioning and their lived experiences. Because one of the struggles that I really, really had and still do, but it's easier to recognize and it's easier to make peace with, and I don't even say make peace with, just adapt to now, is when I am resourced and I am able to shift my mindset and come to that better place, and we have a guest. Um, Even when I'm able to shift to that better place, the person on the receiving end may not be, and that's
Hmm.
okay. And that's sort of like we have to
But is it? Because when,
not it's
then it's
not
like,
okay, but it doesn't mean that how you're changing your approach is wrong,
yeah.
even if it's not received.
No, but that's what our
Yeah,
lower self tells us. Like our lack based, fear based self is like, no, we have to get this ready now or I'm not safe or we're going to break up. Or it like triggers all these stories that then elicits more feelings in the solar plexus chakra and then gets to the heart and magnetizes experiences to you. Like those
yeah,
storytelling, especially coming from human design, storytelling is everything. And our belief system is everything. It's how we experience the world. So if you're not used to like, waiting that out and allowing the other person to have space and time to resource themselves to join you, it feels so scary. It feels like your world is crashing unless you have tools like this and understanding of the other person's energetic signature and like, okay, well, that person really just needs the information because they're a one profile in human design and they really just
yeah,
need to gather a lot more information. Or, like we talked about in other episodes, when a one doesn't have all the information and they're in fear and they're not in their highest self, they're going to make up stories to fill in the blanks of the information they don't have. And they're going to come up with some story, and the other person on the other end is like, whoa, 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 what? That is not at all what happened. But it's an attempt to get a need met to feel safe. Um, that's what I think it might be helpful to go through some of the profiles and
yeah,
see how that could be supportive that way. As we just talked about, one is an investigator type energy, feeling safe with all the information. So if you don't have all the information about a certain circumstance, it's going to bring you perhaps fear,
yeah,
anxiety, lack. So if you are a one in human design, like be unapologetic about getting all the information you need, whatever that means to you, until you feel confident and sure and grounded with that. Like if your partner is like dragging you to a Christmas party or something or some holiday party and you're like, "Oh my god, I don't want to go at all." And you start getting really anxious, it could just mean that your partner needs to give you more information about the party. Who's going to be there? What is the space like? What is the parking like? How long are you going to stay? If your partner is not a one and doesn't hold that energy, they might not understand what
yeah,
a seriously like grounding need that is to have all of those information. Because they don't feel that same need. That's what kind of, when you were talking about resourcing yourself too, our aura types and strategies and authorities and profiles yearn for different
yeah,
resources as well. So, for a generator and a manifesting generator, the resource that they might need the most is time to explore their joy, freedom to create, um, burning out energy physically through their body. That might be the resource they need. They might not need water. They might not need rest. They might need something to get their energy engine running. They might need sex. I mean, their basic chakra is the sacral chakra. So that's creative energy, sexual energy, vitality. So their resources might need to be focused in that. For our manifestors, projectors, and reflectors that don't have their own energetic engine, their resourcing might look like taking a nap, taking a break, taking a rest, getting out in nature and emptying out all the energy that they're soaking in through their chakras that are undefined. So, um, it could mean that resourcing, quote unquote, that we say, like gathering what you need to get back to baseline to feel good, looks different depending on your aura type and your profile. So, for instance, the one needing the information and getting enough information until you feel grounded and safe to make a solid choice that you feel good about. A two is called hermit in traditional human design. Their resourcing might be to get into their own energetic space. Hermit means like to go by yourself, basically have alone time, and allow yourself to play in whatever makes you feel good without other energies influencing you. I have this energy, and the difference it makes when I have adequate alone time and when I don't is wild. The person that shows up when she hasn't had alone time is a true controlling nightmare compared to the girl who gets alone time and contemplation time and space to be in nature and stuff. Wildly different. So those
It's
needs are
also,
going to be different.
like, so important to be aware of that because often
Hmm.
if we don't know that about ourselves, I definitely resonate with that. It is such a huge part of my life and survival and my new, I would say, like, the paradigm shift that I had over the last couple of years of, like, I just had this expectation. I believed that I was an extrovert. I have a lot of, I show up a lot in my work life or when I own businesses where it was energy out, like constant energy out. And I never stopped at that time to be like, oh, is this maybe too much from me to
Hmm.
others? And I need more for myself. And it was like, no, it was a constant punishment of like, why can't you get it together to have more energy? Why, like, it was more of that like
Hmm.
negative, why are we failing? Like my systems were failing me as opposed to me not showing up for my system.
A lot of us that don't have awareness around our energetic makeup and tendencies in this way have to get to such a far extent of
Yep.
burnout or physical illness or mental and emotional health spiral before we're able to learn this about ourselves. And so, human design, knowing these things can help you start the redirection and the resourcing in an earlier stage of the burnout or the destruction, in the healing journey. You can start it a lot quicker when you know these tendencies about yourself or about others too. You can help be accountable to the other people in your life that, whoa, Val, you haven't had a lot of alone time. You've been burning, burning, burning. Like,
Yeah.
you need to prioritize that or you can't show up at work. Or, being a manifesting generator, you need your fingers in a lot of pots. And if your fingers are only in your work pots, that is going to burn you out.
Yep.
You need to spread yourself out into other creative tasks and explore and put your energy in other things until um, what you need to take from that experience. So knowing that about yourself, and then the people in your life too, can really help keep yourself on track and catch burnout before you're in a stage where you're like had to take to the bed, you know?
Mm.
Um, knowing this about yourself, even if the other people don't buy into this stuff, is also very valuable. Like, for my kids, for instance, I have this too energy. I have a great need for hermit time, for alone time, for stillness and silence. I also have the 48 in my earth gate, which is all about going deep and having stillness and silence. So this is like a huge energetic need for me. But my kids can misinterpret that and tell a different story of I don't want to be around them, or I don't want to be in the family, or I'm always trying to escape, which on the unhelpful side, sometimes it does look like escape. But it is a core energetic need of mine to be by myself. So when I say, Mommy has to go run errands by herself, sorry, I have to walk the dogs by myself right now, or I have to go on a hike by myself, whatever boundary I have to set with them, they won't personalize and take as a diss towards them or a separation from them. It's really a need getting met for me so I can show up how they want me to show up. Having those kind of dialogues has been so helpful in my family too, because it gives me more confidence to set boundaries around my energetic needs, like alone time
Yeah.
or like creative time. And that can involve, sometimes that can involve, other people. And sometimes it needs to be me kind of channeling my creativity in my own space. But it allows you the empowerment and the confidence to set boundaries around your needs when you know what they are and you feel confident about that. And like I always say about human design, I didn't learn this new about myself. I knew this to be true about myself, but I didn't have language around it. I didn't have the why around it. And so then I couldn't have possibly set a boundary around my
Yeah.
alone time when I didn't know it was a core energetic need of mine.
Or like giving yourself that permission that
Yes.
in this moment to resource myself will make me the better parent in the next moment
Hmm.
or the better partner or the better version of myself for myself. I
Hmm.
think and certainly in previous generations, I think a lot of struggles in like parental parent child relationships had to do with parents not having the language or resourcing or
Hmm.
tools to understand
Tons.
that. And then to your point, it likely did devolve into whatever the story was because there was no
Hmm.
rebounding. Like the
No.
fault was so long and the under resourcing was so prolonged that it became the chronic state of the relational dynamic or of the family. And that comes up so much in like internal
So
family
much.
systems
Hmm.
and obviously like all therapies talk and otherwise where sometimes we didn't experience a capital T trauma that we would assume to be trauma because we didn't recognize that emotional neglect is also a trauma. That
Hmm.
someone not getting their needs met meant that they didn't have the resourcing or energy reserves to meet the needs of like a child or a partner or what have you. And so it is both it is so challenging, but how to manage so that, like, to your point, your children understand, like, this is something that you need so that you can show up as the parent that they want and need and
Hmm.
deserve. And they get that on the other end. So there's a trust built in the system of like, oh,
Oh, the
she's gonna do
trust
her thing. And now she's,
and the example of it too. So
yeah.
then they can feel unapologetic about saying, only one of my family members have the same energy, has a two. One of my sons has a two. And so hopefully I can give him permission to say, no, I really need to just go by
Yeah.
myself for a little bit. Or start to recognize that need as a basic need of his. And, for the other children and, my spouse, like their own energetic needs. So
Yeah.
we talked about the one, we talked about the two, the three has a core need to experience a variety of life experiences. They have to put their energy into things. So if they feel lack of control and lack of freedom to be able to experience a lot and learn from that and create a story instead of that they just make a bunch of mistakes and they can't trust themselves, that is going to hugely imprint on them and how they show up as their highest self or not. It's going to be really hard to show up in a confident highest self way if you are creating a story around how when you do things you mess up instead of a story that's empowering around, hey, I'm a three. I have a great need to, make messy decisions in my life and then learn from those lessons and then share those lessons out from others. It's a hugely different story to say, I'm a screw up versus I'm an experimenter. I'm an explorer of life. Like those are two wildly different tracks and can influence every decision, every relationship, every job, every way we show up. Um, for the four, it's social behavior. So, Val, you're a four. One of your resourcing is to be social. So, if work has taken you more solo, more by yourself, you have to then recognize that as a four and say, okay, how can I get social? How can I weave more social activity within my work? Or how can I weave a meetup on Zoom if I'm out of town with my core friends to just get that social need met so I can show up as my resourced self. And then for the five, it's the problem solving kind of teacher need to help people with their problems, the correct problems that they're supposed to help with, which they can use their authority, their decision maker to decide what's accurate for them. But if they're not out there teaching other people, consulting with other people, helping people solve their problems and then solving their own problems, they're going to show up as, you know, the lower parts
Yeah.
of themselves are going to take over for that because that need is not getting met. And that need will get met, just not in a resourceful way like teaching people and helping people. It will look like probably micromanaging, controlling people, or themselves, controlling themselves in unhelpful ways. And then as the six is a role model energy. So if they haven't had time and freedom to play as the three, as the experimenter, and have lots of life lessons, have space to integrate those lessons, and then have opportunities or take opportunities to share their life experiences with others, whatever role that looks like. That is a great need, a foundational need for a six. And if that is not getting met in those helpful ways, it will get met in unhelpful ways,
Yeah.
whatever that might look like.
No.
Telling people what to do, what they think is best.
Or also probably just like not feeling heard or validated.
Exactly.
And then looking for any opportunity. I mean, we see this come up a lot where people have a need to contribute, whether it's like personal life or at work, where I would say I see it a little bit more at work where you're clearly in this um, interplay of wanting validation and wanting those cycles of like validation and acknowledgement and all of those things. And you can see personalities coming to bear and like where people are in terms of how they force contribution, either where it's not necessary or not appropriate, or
Yes.
sometimes, for different folks, like withhold contribution because they don't feel the invitation, but they actually, it would be the right moment for them. So it's just such an
Hmm.
interesting thing to balance at like a personal and
Hmm.
collective level.
Yeah, well, and it's overall, we're all really finding ways to get our needs met.
Mhm.
So, having the clarity of what our foundational needs are and the resourceful ways to get them met is the crux of everything. When you can identify your needs, know resourceful, helpful ways to get them met, then you have a greater likelihood to show up as your highest self no matter what the world is throwing on you, especially if you have clarity around the conditioning forces from the outside, your family of origin, collective conditioning, whether it's patriarchy, racism, um, power, whatever messages are coming at you. If you have clarity around that, and then you know how to get your needs met, ain't nobody can touch you.
And so that's it. We solved it. No, I'm just
So
kidding.
that's it. Okay, thanks everyone for joining us here on the Human Sessions podcast. But I hope this is an invitation for you to get clarity on what your needs are, how you're currently trying to get those needs met in helpful ways and not so helpful ways. Maybe start to ask yourself these questions like, what influence am I under when I do that? What are my reactionary patterns? What did I learn from as a child? What have I learned from culture that's helpful and not helpful? Just starting these questions can really turn your path into a trajectory that can give you a lot of community, self confidence, alignment, joy, well being, peace, satisfaction, all those good things that make this life a lot more fun.
I mean, I think it really does come down to like those frameworks, knowing your human design, just get that out of the way if you haven't already plugged that in and kind of just gotten your type. Step one.
That's right. You can go to my website, it's linked in the show notes, and get your free chart for yourself, but also for the people in your life so you can
Mhm.
have greater understanding around how they're showing up too and how you can
Yeah.
support them.
And then it'll be a whole series of its own, but like how to ground in some frameworks of just higher self thinking. And when you're in a moment of activation, I know, Rachel, you have your own. I have my own of like the go to things where it's like, I need to take a pause and I'm going to run through these factual things that I know about myself, factual things that I know about my patterns, and then just the basic truth, which we'll always have to come back to in any of these moments of like, what information do I know for sure versus what am I spinning up in my own kind of head, traumas, patterns, conditioning, all of those things. So I think we'll come back to that on just walking through how do we actually go through that in like really triggered moments, which is so fun, but also the most valuable resourcing it's kind of a intersectional combined resourcing of many different things. So for another day.
Thank you so much for listening to Human Sessions. If you loved this episode, please make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts so more people can join our Human Sessions. We'll see you in the next episode.